Thank you for listening to Jesus, Dead or Alive. We are on to episode 12, Wasted Worldview. Paul then adds another implication. If in this life only we had hoped in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. Verse 19. Paul's point is clear. If this world is all there is, it is pointless for Christians to live in the context of one to come. We might as well live it up to the full while we can, squeezing every drop of pleasure we can out of the few years we spend on earth, regardless of any moral or eternal considerations. If we die as animals, why not live as animals? Corliss Lamont, a contemporary humanist, cheerfully recited, "While we're here, let's live in clover, for when we're dead all over." Paul recognized that many took this approach, and he quoted an ancient saying with which millions today happily agree. "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." 1 Corinthians 15:32. Yet Paul and his fellow Christians took a completely different line. Their philosophy and lifestyles were geared to the conviction that this life is a preparation for the one to come. In an uncertain world, they had their eyes fixed on heaven, the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Hebrews 11:10. They were convinced that the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. 1 John 2:17. Above all, they were certain that when Jesus told his followers just before his death, "I go to prepare a place for you," John 14:2, he was telling the truth and referring to the glories of heaven, where death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more. Revelation 21:4. But if Jesus did not rise from the dead, he was not going anywhere to prepare anything for anybody. Instead, he would simply rot away in his grave, just like everyone else. Paul had other reasons for saying that if this were true, Christians were to be pitied. In those early years, Christians often suffered fierce opposition and persecution because of their faith. According to Fox's Book of Martyrs, John was the only apostle who died of natural causes, all the others being executed because of their commitment to Jesus Christ. The apostle Peter is said to have been crucified upside down following the execution of his wife. Successive Roman emperors had Christians sewn up in skins of wild animals and thrown to dogs. Others were tortured, beheaded, crucified, or boiled alive. In the first 300 years of the Christian Church, at least 10,000 believers were put to death for no other reason than their faith in Jesus Christ. Paul himself was in danger every hour, 1 Corinthians 15:30. And he says that he had suffered imprisonments with countless beatings, was beaten with rods and stoned, and had gone through toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and in thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. 2 Corinthians 11:23-27. He was eventually taken to Rome, where tradition says he was beheaded on the directions of the Emperor Nero. Why would he deliberately expose himself to all of this if he knew that Jesus was dead? 2,000 years later, countless Christians are still being pressurized, persecuted, and put to death because of their faith. There are countries in which to convert to Christianity from another religion is effectively to sign one's death warrant. A recent report from the World Evangelical Alliance Religious Commission concludes, literally hundreds of thousands of people today are being killed, brutalized, sold as slaves, imprisoned, tortured, threatened, discriminated against, and arrested solely because they are Christians. They are being subjected to persecution and suffering, the extent of which we can hardly begin to comprehend, because of their faith. Incredibly, more than 200 million people in over 60 nations are being denied their basic human rights for one reason only: they are Christians. Yet if Jesus was not raised from the dead, all this pain and suffering is pointless, and all these sufferers are victims of a gigantic hoax. No wonder Paul says that if the resurrection never took place, Christians, of all people, are most to be pitied. New Men, New Movement. The Scottish scholar Professor F. Bruce claimed, "If Jesus had not risen from the dead, we should probably never have heard of him." He may be right. What is certain is that around AD 32, a dynamic new movement sprang into existence, beginning with a handful of men who believed Jesus had risen from the dead. A few days earlier, they had been terrified at what might happen to them as followers of Jesus. Yet after the resurrection, they came out of hiding and risked their lives by preaching that Jesus was alive. Their chief spokesman was Peter, who 7 weeks earlier had not only deserted Jesus, but even denied that he knew him. Luke 22:54-62. Yet when he and John were arrested and interrogated, their accusers were amazed at the boldness of Peter and John. Acts 4:13. All the apostles experienced the same change, and not even the threat of imprisonment or execution could stop them. They had been demoralized and distraught. Now they were confident and courageous, and their amazing transformation from cowardice to courage persuaded Professor J.N.D. Anderson that it was by far and away the strongest circumstantial evidence for the resurrection. They were soon joined by countless others. On the very first day of their public preaching, about 3,000 were added to their number, Acts 2:41. Soon the number of men came to be about 5,000, Acts 4:4. The church's rapid growth continued in spite of constant persecution, first locally, then throughout the Roman Empire. The Emperor Nero made Christians the scapegoats for a disastrous fire that swept through Rome in AD 64, and he had them savagely tortured, burnt alive, or fed to lions. Countless others were executed for their faith over the next 3 centuries, yet their courage and conviction led to so many new believers replacing them that the 3rd century theologian Tertullian, himself a convert from paganism, famously said, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." By the early part of the 4th century, Christianity had spread so far and penetrated society so deeply that in AD 313 Emperor Constantine, who had also professed faith, declared Christianity as a recognized religion of the Roman Empire, and by AD 395 it had become the only official state religion. There is a good case for saying that this weakened the Christian cause rather than strengthened it, by making the Christian faith cultural rather than personal, but it is still amazing that within 400 years it had gained such recognition by the state that had killed its founder. What was the key to this movement's staggering growth? It taught nothing about the nature of God, the origin of man, or the creation of the universe. Nor was it revolutionary on social issues. Just one thing triggered it off: the resurrection of Jesus. The modern historian Robert Linder puts it perfectly. It is hard to conceive that there would have been any Christianity without a firm belief by the early disciples in the bodily resurrection of Jesus. They were convinced that their master had conquered death and had appeared to many of them in person. Only this resurrection faith explains how the small, motley, demoralized group which Jesus left on earth after his reported ascension could have developed the enthusiasm to sweep all obstacles before them in their bold worldwide mission. A few disheartened followers were transformed into the most dynamic movement in the history of mankind.